thank you all for showing up. My name is Charles Barzun. I wanted to start off this panel by introducing myself and the committee. I am the chair of what's called the Academic Placement Committee, and these are two of my fellow members of the committee. So the purpose of this is to give you a little bit of a sense of academic careers, how they work, how people have managed to get jobs teaching in law schools, what it's like, what you can do in law school to sort of facilitate that. And so forth. So I'll let our panelists talk about that in a moment. But in a way, the most important thing for you to understand is just that this committee exists. Okay, so but we are here, and we can help you a lot, actually. Most of what we do is helping our graduates. So we do moot court. We practice job interviews, read job talks, to help people with research agendas, just talk through the whole process. There's a very specific process, maybe some of which we'll get into. But anyway, we can do all of that when you're an alumnus. So just remember that we are here. Okay, great. Let's begin. Why don't we begin with Rich Schragger, who's taught here for I don't even know how long.
2 years. 25 years.
And the basic idea here is we'll all talk for a little bit. Each of us will talk for a little bit, and then it's an opportunity for you guys to ask questions.
Yeah. So thank you all for coming. It's great to have a nice crew. This is the best job in the world. It is the best job. There is no better job in the legal field or in any job. This is the best. So you're smart to be here. That doesn't mean they're easy jobs to get. There is some challenging aspects to it, but that's okay. We do as an institution, do pretty well in placing our graduates in academic jobs, in a range of academic jobs. So I'll just talk a little bit about maybe first what kind of academic jobs there are out there, and then I'll tell you about how I got one, which is maybe helpful, and then we can talk a little bit more about the kind of mechanics of the academic market process. Maybe if you want to do that, we can divide it up in any way. Anyway, so the academic job market in the law school world is there are actually multiple kinds of jobs in this building. One is what I do, which is the basic what we might call research faculty. So we teach and we do scholarship of various kinds, research in various areas. And as you know, we have different specialties. We teach in different areas, and then we write. That's one of the main things that we're doing is scholarship. And scholarship's a big part of becoming an academic on the research faculty, and then getting tenure in a place, which means they don't fire you, and then continuing as a scholar throughout your career. So what we do is scholarship and teaching. We do some other things too, but that's the main thing. But then we have lots of people in the building who are faculty who are doing clinical faculty, for example, are not necessarily doing scholarship, although they can. They're doing clinical kinds of teaching plus taking cases, right? They're much more on the practitioner side, but they're in the academic community and they have academic jobs as well. Legal writing folks are also academics in this building, and they do legal writing instruction and other kinds of instruction. They'll do some scholarship too, often in the legal writing kind of space, and that's also an academic kind of job. There's also kind of academic / administrative jobs all in the building as well, and so some folks many of them are law graduates who are interested in being in a law school environment, and there are jobs that are available in those environments as well. So depending on your interests, and folks come to us from all these areas, some who want to be research faculty, some who want to do legal writing, some who want to do clinical stuff, and we help them all. And there are slightly different routes to doing that. I'll talk a little bit about research faculty and how I became a legal academic. And then we can, if you guys have questions about other aspects of and other kinds of jobs, we can talk about that too. So I went to law school. I then clerked for a judge on the Third Circuit immediately after law school. Clerkships are often a good route to, particularly for research faculty, but all kinds of jobs. I recommend clerkships to everybody, but especially to people who might be interested in a scholarly career, in part because it's kind of a mark of distinction. It can be any clerkship, but it's also a way that you can hone your legal writing skills and your scholarly skills to some degree. We can talk also about how one does clerkships and so on. But I clerked, and then I went to a small law firm in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years. The transition to legal academia for me was I met my future wife in Washington, D.C. She had to finish her career in her legal training in New Haven, so we moved to New Haven, and I needed a job. So I got a job as a legal writing instructor at Quinnipiac University Law School, which was super lucky and terrific, and I taught 2 sections of legal writing, and also did a little bit of work for the law firm as well, so that we could eat, because some of these jobs initially don't pay that much. While she finished her legal education. That turned into, luckily for me, the Quinnipiac needed somebody to teach civil procedure in the next year. And so they were willing to take me on as what's called a visiting assistant professor, or VAP. So you might hear some of these terms. And as a VAP, I started teaching, not as a full professor or hired, but hired temporarily. And what many people do now in transitioning to legal academia is get these kinds of slightly fellowship-y kinds of positions or visiting assistant professor positions. Lots of law schools have them, so that you have time to do some scholarly writing at the same time. So you're trying to prepare some work to take on to the market with you. That is scholarly work. And again, I'm talking about the research faculty side of things. What's interesting about the law school teaching market, and that makes it different from other academia, is that we don't require that you have a PhD. Often in other, obviously in research faculty, in the English department, or the history department, or the biology department, or the economics department, you're going to need a PhD, and you follow a certain route. You go get a PhD, you do a postdoc, you then go on to the teaching market or the professor research faculty market. In the law schools, we have lots of people who have both JDs and PhDs, and we can talk a little bit about that too. So that's another route. I did not do that. I didn't do the PhD route. My spouse did. That's maybe why she became the dean of the law school. Because she was better prepared and was always going to rise, right? So, but in our faculty, in fact, we have a pretty good mix. And in fact, many of our faculty are just JDs. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I'm just JD too. And not JD, PhD, joint degrees. But joint degrees are prevalent, and if you're thinking about academia, that's something you want to consider a little bit. Anyway, so I'm teaching at Quinnipiac, and then I go on to the teaching market more generally. What I need to do that is something, and again, this is research faculty, some kind of scholarly product, some kind of piece of writing that can impress a faculty, that I will both be a scholar and a good one, and maybe a decent teacher, though that's often secondary. Not always, but sometimes. I think both are part of the package, obviously. And then there's a process by which you go on to the teaching market, and and that's a process that our committee helps you do. And it's a pretty standard kind of process, although it does get a little bit, as with the other markets, the original organizing kind of timelines have kind of shrunk and gotten faster or less organized. But that's what's happening across career paths in the law schools. Anyway, so go on the market. interview. There's a series of kinds of interview processes that would be familiar to you. There's kind of an initial screening interview if they're interested, and then there's then if they are, they might bring you back and you give what's called the job talk paper. The job talk paper is your paper, and you present it to the faculty. You also talk to the faculty at length. And they're looking at your record and your resume and your job talk paper and your performance in that setting. And they're also thinking about, well, do we need this guy? Right? Do we need a guy who does property and local government? And they're like, well, local government, who cares? That's sad for me, but all right. But property we really need, right? Somebody to teach property or something like that, right? They're going to start thinking about those things. So that's what law schools are doing. They're not hiring a ton of people in any given year, but again, as I said, we've done pretty well with our graduates at various levels of the law school world. And like the law school world that you've seen, there are various levels of law schools. Though the jobs, and I've now taught at many law schools, Quinnipiac is just one of them, Quinnipiac here obviously, but Georgetown, NYU, Columbia, Chicago, all these law schools, the job is very similar in all of them. And similarly awesome. Anyway, so I'll stop there, and that's a start at least.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And this is Alice Abrokwa, and this is how many years have you been here?
So I'm in year 2.
Only year 2.
That's right. I will echo that this is an awesome job. It's essentially you get to kind of chase the things that you are interested in, right? You're being paid to think and write about things that you're curious about, and then engage with other people, right? Students and your colleagues that are kind of similarly chasing their own curiosities. So that's a really fulfilling thing to do. Kudos to all of you who are thinking about this now while you're in school. I came to academia much later in my trajectory, and it wasn't a thing I was thinking about in law school myself. I was really focused on, I'm going to be a civil rights litigator, which is in fact kind of how I've spent most of my career. So I clerked right after law school, first on the Eastern District of Virginia, and then on the Fourth Circuit, not thinking that the clerkship was teeing me up for academia. I did the clerkship because I thought I would learn something about litigation and how judges make decisions that would be useful to me as a litigator, which was true and ended up being what I did for the better part of 10 years, mostly class action litigation, but also some kind of policy lawyering in the government. I started to think about academia actually while I was in government, because one of the things you'll see, when you're in a government agency and lawyering in that capacity, you have a particular mandate and a jurisdiction, and so it can be limiting in how you think about the law, right? At that point, I was working at the Department of Justice in the Disability Rights section, and so I could work on cases that had to do with disability. What if I wanted to work on discrimination cases that dealt with the intersection of disability and race or gender, and another trait outside of the confines of what my job allowed me to do? So the first kind of piece of legal scholarship I wrote was actually me just trying to kind of chase a thing I was interested in, right? I had this theory for what would count as discrimination and why it would be valuable to pursue that kind of claim, what remedies you would ask for, why it would be meaningful to do. And I didn't really have an outlet for that in my day job. So I did legal writing in the harder way, which was kind of outside of my normal 9-to-5 job, purely because I was curious about it. And I also kind of just really wrote it for me, right? I wanted to express my thoughts on why I thought we were missing something, some potential in anti-discrimination law, and then found people citing it, right? In their own briefs, in their own scholarships. A couple of times I've kind of picked open a book to learn from what that author's writing and been surprised to kind of see this thing that I wrote just for me already cited in that source. So that's been really fulfilling to kind of think about having an impact through your ideas and your scholarship. My earlier vision of impact litigation had just been what I say in the briefs, the arguments that I make in court. And so I started to kind of think about having an impact through the ideas that I express through my writing. But even at that point, wasn't really thinking that I might make a transition into academia. But over the years, found myself kind of guest lecturing at different DC law schools, finding other things I was curious about in the world and wanting to write about those. One thing I'll say as a suggestion, Whether you think academia is a thing you're going to be pursuing kind of immediately after law school, the more common timeline is for people to start transitioning to academia, I'd say like 3, 4, 5 years out, maybe after clerking or working at a firm for a period of time. Whether you think that's your path or you're thinking, like me, it might be 10 plus years after you graduate law school, just keep note of what you're interested in. I literally keep a moleskin journal that's like my ideas journal, and the top right corner are different topics, and then the things I come across, the conversations I have with people that relate to that topic. So corporal punishment page, and then a thing I learn in the news that's related to that. School discipline, a thing I learned that's related to that. If you make this transition to academia, you've got to know what you're interested in. What are you inspired to kind of inquire about more deeply? And so you can start doing that work now. The question your colleague asked in class that never got answered, or the thing that's an ambiguity in something that you uncovered in a course. Just keep note of that and continue to kind of steep yourself in learning about those issues regardless, right? It will make you a better lawyer within and without academia. So it's useful to kind of keep track of that. The pathways to academia, the more common path is to kind of pursue these teaching fellowships. A number of schools have them. I'm sure if you kind of send an email to any one of us, we can kind of direct you to the best resources about them. Often you will work for 2 to 3 years at the law school, teach, in some places you're teaching the legal writing course or like a seminar that's your particular interest area. And then the rest of the time is for you to research and write, to prepare both the paper that you'll present as your job talk paper, and then have some prior publications too, so that they can see this isn't a person with kind of a one-off singular idea. They've got a whole thread of things that they're interested in learning about, which is also why you can be doing the work now to kind of think about what are the questions that I'm interested in and how are they connected, so you have a narrative to kind of explain what your agenda might be. That's the research agenda, where you kind of lay out the questions you want to answer in the first several years of your academic career. So that's part of what you need to kind of prepare yourself for. The actual process of getting the job, you fill out this basically kind of like one-page form called the FAR form, Faculty Appointments something with an R form, and it identifies the kind of classes you'd be willing to teach, your research areas. It's kind of a combination of a CV that's a little bit more targeted towards academic jobs. You include your actual CV, the publications you've written, what's forthcoming, the presentations you've engaged in. Sometimes if you've done one of these teaching fellowships, they'll ask for your teaching evaluations in that program. Your research agenda, where you say, here's the next 3 things I think I'm going to write about, and then the actual paper itself, right? The thing that you're going to meet with the faculty about at a workshop. Usually it's a 1-hour talk where you present very briefly on your idea, and then most of the time is to engage with your colleagues. I say very briefly, like 10 to 15 minutes of you talking about the paper, because the expectation is these are people who have already read the paper and they're curious enough about your research to invite you to talk. So most of the rest is really just the exchange to see how receptive you are to feedback, what other trains of thought you might be willing to engage in. So that's the thing you're preparing for. The process, once you've filled out this FAR form, starts with screening interviews. So appointments committees will look at your FAR form and the other materials and decide if they want to kind of invite you to a short half-hour interview. They used to all be in person at a hotel in DC. During the pandemic, they switched to being by Zoom. When I was on the market a few years ago, those were by Zoom too, which meant that you could do a lot of them, but it also meant that there was some difficulty. They could get overwhelming if you had a ton of the Zoom interviews. So last year, I think they moved to these kind of regional activities. If you're interested in New York law schools, you could come to a particular event where you met with a number of schools in that area, but they also did the Zoom screeners. I also heard of some people actually flying in person for screeners. screeners, which is a heavy lift for just a very short interview. But anyways, that's the initial stage to decide if they will invite you back for the callback, which is the usually 2-day interview process. You meet with groups of faculty during the day. You present your actual job talk in front of the full faculty or people who are available. You meet with the dean, the research dean, librarians. It's a chance to kind of get to know the law school community and the town as you yourself are thinking about, is this a place I want to start my teaching career? And it's a chance for them to get to know you more deeply. So that is the process. As Charles said, if you all are starting this process for yourself, you should be reaching back out to the law school, and we can help you navigate how to frame yourself in your opening materials, how to navigate the job talk process. We'll help moot you in the actual job talk process, help you figure out what to do if you have competing offers and different deadlines. So there's a lot to kind of think about in terms of the actual process once you're there. But for now, I would really just focus on thinking about, why do you want to do this? What are you interested in? And steeping yourself as much as you can in the issue areas that you think you want to explore as an academic. I'll stop here so we have more time for your questions, but let me just truly echo, this is actually a dream job, and I hope that all of you think about it seriously.
Great, thank you, Alice.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to step in for our third panelist. I've just gotten word that she's sick. Megan's sick at home. I mean, I think she's going to be okay. But Megan Stevenson was going to speak here. And one of the interesting things about Megan's path to academia is that she does not have a JD. She only has a PhD. And that was one reason that I wanted her. One of the things that will come up and that is worth discussing about is the role of a PhD. I hadn't really any prepared remarks because I didn't think I was going to speak, but I do this all the time. So I have a few things to say. I'll say a little bit about my own path, but then give a little bit of advice about what you might be want to think about right now. Most of which is just echoing what Alice and Rich said. So I went to law school a little bit later than some people. I was out for 5 years, I think, from college. And so I had already worked in a career. I always joked the closest I came to practicing law was actually before law school, because I worked at a company and did kind of mergers and acquisitions and read term sheets and that kind of stuff. So I had a little bit of a sort of business knowledge when I went to law school. But when I went to law school, I thought of it as very much a career change. I knew when I was starting law school that I wanted to try to teach law school. I'd thought about doing a PhD in philosophy or political theory or possibly history, and I decided to go to law school instead, but I knew that I wanted to do that. So that is relatively rare. But it was helpful to me because it meant that I immediately started doing things. But I realized that is not the norm. So once I did that, but anyway, I did that in law school. I did the JD MA program, and one of my pitches for that program, that now that I run it, is that it's a good way to figure out whether you want to be an academic because you write a substantial paper. I did that. I clerked, like these guys, on the Second Circuit and then did a fellowship, like Rich mentioned. It was actually very new at the time, although now it's been around for a while, fellowship at Harvard Law School, and then I came back here. So I never practiced. Not even, so I'm like the extreme end of yours. Rich, how many years were you at that? 2 years. Okay, so not much more, but more than I was. So that's so I am sort of an extreme end, and because for me the real choice was whether to do a PhD, and I thought hard about that. I thought about doing a PhD in history, and I thought about doing a PhD in philosophy. And the fact that I couldn't decide which one to do was sort of my answer as to why I shouldn't do either. I was also a little bit older at that time. I was now in my 30s by the time I was done with law school and the clerkship. So I just sort of thought, I'm going to just try to do it right now. So, as I say, I had an advantage of when I was in law school because I knew that I wanted to do this. So when I saw a sign in that hallway that was for the person who has my job or in our committee saying, if you're interested in professor, I don't think there was a panel at the time. By the way, it was Curtis Bradley, by the way, at that time. So he just said, I think it was just like an email address or something. So I went and talked to Professor Bradley, and he was really helpful. And he basically said, do two things. If you're, I sort of said, well, what can I do in law school to make this more likely? I didn't know that I could do it. I just thought I would try. And he said, well, try to, focus on your classes and try to get good grades and, try hard in your classes and try to write something. Try to write one thing of substantial of a serious piece of scholarship. When we do, you have a writing requirement that is, I don't know how many pages or whatever, but it's relatively easy to satisfy that. But to write something that is in some way a contribution, even just a small one to some field, is difficult and takes a lot of time. But there is an institutional apparatus that enables you to do that. They're called independent studies. I mean, you can do a seminar paper, that's one way of doing it, and then sort of working on it after that. But you can do an independent study of 1, 2, or 3 credits where you pick any topic that you want and go and talk with a professor and get them to advise you on it. And I've never said no to anyone who's asked me to do one. It requires being a sort of a self-starter and figuring out what you want to do, but you don't have to have a well-formed project in mind. Just go to someone with a vague topic and say, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? I usually encourage people to do it over 2 semesters because it takes a long time. So I think of the first semester, first few months, as really just figuring out what the topic is or what the question is that you want to ask, and then another semester writing it. So that's the main thing that you can do in law school. If you've come out of law school with one substantial work, even if you don't get it published, and you can try to get it published either as a note in the Virginia Law Review or in other law reviews, you can submit it. That's something, and then you go out and you practice, but you've got a little something. You've shown you can do it, and perhaps more importantly, you've figured out whether it's something you like. I always tell the story about one of my co-clerks who I thought was one of the smartest people I've ever met, and he would have the most interesting ideas about all sorts of issues that we were talking about in the court. And I would say, are you interested in being a professor? And he said, no, I hate writing long papers. And that was it for him, And so he went and practiced law. He just knew that he didn't like that kind of thing. So that's something to really figure out, is whether you like writing long papers, because that's what we do, pretty much. Now, as I should say, and we're happy to answer questions about this. As Rich mentioned, it's very important to recognize that we are only kind of one track of teaching, right? There are legal writing professors, clinical professors, other kinds of people who kind of mix practice and teaching in ways that are not expected of us. So what is expected of us is that we write long papers and that we publish them. So that's the main point there, and I really want to underline and endorse what Alice was saying about your what is it made out of, moleskin?
That's the brand, but one of those just
a little note thing. So I always joke that you could just keep it as your notes on your note app on your phone, right? Literally, it could just be just a bulleted list of things that interest you as they come up. A case that you noticed that you read in some class, a conversation you had, a law review article that you read, something that someone said, something you saw on the news, a tweet, cut and paste the tweet or whatever. Whatever it is, just save it. You don't have to think about what it means. You don't have to do anything. But when you come back, just as you were saying, when you make that decision of, I want to start to move out of my job and maybe try to get a fellowship, you got to start somewhere. And that's where you start. That's where you're essentially, it's the seeds of your, I'm trying to think of the right organic metaphor, maybe seeds of your research agenda and your scholarship, right? Is you got to figure out, you got to start somewhere. And so that's a good place to start. So that's really what I encourage people to think about as you go and do other things, in the early parts of your career. And there was something else I was going to say, which I guess is just that, and also, it's worth keeping in touch. If you think that this is something that's important, the other thing that you kind of, as you sort of incubate your list of scholarly ideas, it's also worth keeping in touch with any connections you have here at the law school with faculty that you maybe have done an independent study with. Just check in, every couple of year or two or whatever, just because in a way, I joke, so they don't forget you, but it's also so that you don't forget them, right? so that you remember, because those are the people you can come to and ask for advice. And it's always useful. It's always good asking people for advice because you learn something and you help sort of establish a relationship or build on a relationship. So I encourage you to do that as well. I think that's all I got, and because really the point here is to open this up for questions. So happy to answer any questions, and all three of us can answer. Yep.
Yeah, first, thank you all so much for your advice and guidance. How does adjunct teaching work in the law? I'm coming from a social science background. I know it's different there. How does it work in the legal field?
So we have lots of adjuncts who come down and do short courses or weekend courses or regular courses. And the way that works is one of our deans is trying to figure out the curriculum here, and often adjuncts have have interesting experiences and have taught for a while in our on our faculty, but they're paid nominally. It's really out of the goodness of their heart that they're doing it. They're often alums who enjoy teaching, and that's something they do get paid, but it's not it's not something you're going to be able to put together a career at doing. But we do encourage it, and it's great if you guys go off and become experts in various fields, which is what will happen. We'd like to bring you back and have you teach our students. Yeah.
Can I just add to that, actually?
Yeah, great.
I'll stand here.
The only other thing I'll say about that is it can be a harder path towards getting a permanent teaching job if you start off as an adjunct. Only because, if you're teaching as an adjunct, you've got some other day job, and so it's probably harder to kind of do the writing and research that you need to have the job talk paper. And some places have kind of like a more formal barrier between adjunct professors and then entry into like the doctrinal kind of podium teaching that we do, or clinical teaching. So you might just, if you're already living in a city, there's an opportunity to do adjunct teaching at a particular institution, and you think that you want to bridge into teaching more long-term, you might connect with people that have taught as adjuncts before and just ask, did it seem like there was a realistic possibility for you to transition from adjuncting to being on the permanent faculty? Because not every school has the same kind of opportunity for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Is that a hand?
What if you're really interested in a lot of seemingly disconnected things?
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem. I mean, this is part of the, what seems disconnected now may not actually be so disconnected, right? If they're piquing your interest, there probably is some commonality there. So, in my own practice career, I've done lots of things that kind of maybe were connected to one other experience I'd had, but it took a while to kind of see what the bigger picture is, right? I did children's mental health, I did special education, I did disability focused on adults. I found threads between those, and kind of when you go back and you reflect on your notes, or you have to put on paper, here are the research questions I'm interested in, there actually probably really is a there kind of connecting them. There are some people that have completely kind of disparate interests, and I actually think it's okay to have two kind of tracks that are pretty different, but you still want to confine that. So if you say my research agenda is 5 different things that aren't connected at all, that's going to be a harder kind of sell, I think, for an institution, that you've really got a plan for where your scholarship is going to go. But it is okay to be in 2 different areas, and you'll likely find that your thoughts aren't so disparate once you kind of put them on paper and give them time to percolate.
Other questions? Yeah, sure.
So one of the things that I struggle with, so there's a lot of things about academia that I'm really interested in. The ideas part, I think I have a lot of ideas. One of the things that I struggle with, I think, is sitting down, writing the paper. Right? And I think I can even see the argument in my mind, and I know what I want to write, but that process is the most difficult part of the process. Yeah. Do you think I'm just a burnt out 3L and there's me, or do you think that's a big red flag?
That's a good question.
So, writing is hard. If it weren't hard, we'd all be doing it, because, as I've said to you repeatedly, this is the best job in the world. So we'd all be doing it. It's really hard, and now there are some who just this is just what they were born to do, but most of us have to struggle. So so I went up to, as I said, I went up to New Haven. We're living in New Haven. I'm teaching legal writing part-time, basically, and then I'm trying to write a paper. And it was, and the interest was, I had taken a local government law course with a famous professor, and I was really angry at that course my whole time being in the course. So anger drove me to write something about this. Anger is a good a good impetus. Those people are wrong, and I'm going to tell them why they're wrong. So that is one motivating factor to get you to actually sit down and do it. So then I write this paper, and I send it to this professor who was very kind. I was in a big class with him. So this is also a lesson, which is we want to support you. So even if you're in a big class with somebody, but you're interested in what they do and you wrote something, reach out to them, send the paper to them, say, listen, I'm interested. they might not remember you, but a lot of times they will remember you. And in fact, they're really pleased a couple of years out, right? I was 2 or 3 years out, a couple of years out. Anyway, so I sent it to him, and it turned out it was terrible. Now, did I know it was terrible? No. Did I think it was great? I probably had a suspicion it wasn't great, but I didn't know what to do. So he spent time with me on the phone, right? I didn't go up there. I could have gone up there and had a meeting. And he's like, this is terrible. He didn't quite say it that way. I had criticized him in various ways, so I thought, oh, he's just offended. But it wasn't that. It was just, I had been mad. I wrote a paper. It wasn't great. This is terrible. And you need to go back and think a little harder. And that was the best advice I'd ever gotten, right? Some honest advice that the paper just was terrible. And so I went back. I still wrote in that area, but I worked harder at it. Now, I spent a lot of time doing it. Like I was teaching 2 sections of legal writing, so it wasn't my whole life. And they had given, Quinnipiac was nice enough, they gave me an office and stuff. And I'm just churning it out, or trying to. And the first draft, which was this paper, was terrible, and the second draft was a little better, clearly good enough to kind of get me over the hump. So it's hard to write. It's hard to write while you're doing other things. That's why law school is a good time to kind of dip your toe in and see if you can do it. And obviously we have the ways to do it. So in a seminar is often a structured way to do it, and you get feedback, or independent study, that's a way to do it. And so that's a good opportunity. Once you're out there, say clerking or working for a law firm or some other, right, it's much, much harder. I mean, the fact that Alice was able to, this is superhuman, to go home at night and be like, now I'm going to write, is really hard to do.
I had a very noisy neighbor, which
so
allowed me to-
right, kept me up. That's super hard. So that's why people do these VAPs and these kind of fellowship things. And again, we're just talking about the research faculty and getting opportunities. And this is also why people do PhDs, is because that's a structure setting to do a dissertation. And then they come out with a piece of writing, and the dissertation is their kind of ticket. So don't be discouraged. Yes, you're a burned out 3L. That's understandable. But you have some ideas, write them down. Get some of it down on a piece of paper. You might go back to it at some point, and that's what I did. I was like, I have lots of ideas, and I'm angry all the time, so let me try to write. Now it's 2.5 years later. Let me try to write some of this down. Yeah.
I'll just add to that. I mean, if it's something that you can have a meaningful conversation with someone about, you can also write it. And the job talk paper that I presented here, the first line of it is like verbatim from a conversation that I had had with a mentor about why this issue was important to me, right? So, if it's a thing that you're genuinely interested in, the writing is just you expressing it. And you can do all sorts of things if the actual, like, searching for the word is difficult for you. Have a conversation with someone, see what words you choose, literally go back and put that on paper, use the dictation function, take yourself on a walk. There are lots of ways to actually get the thoughts on a piece of paper, and then be open to sharing it with other people, because you will often find what are the spots that you forgot to consider, the things you don't get sufficient credit for. That editing process is actually much more time consuming than the actual initial writing part of it, but it's the thing that actually helps you get your ideas out in the world and shapes them more meaningfully. It does help if you are a person that likes writing, but I know plenty of law professors that actually hate the writing part, but they enjoy the ideas part and find a way to put the ideas on paper so they can engage in that. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing. I was all ready to make a joke, and my joke answer was going to be, there's a simple solution to that, which is you just have ChatGPT write it for you. But the reason it wasn't really worth making the joke, but actually it occurred to me that, and this I'm not joking, it actually, using some of the AI tools like ChatGPT or Claude or those ones could be helpful, not for your purposes. You got to write it at the end of the day. But in terms of thinking, like when you have the list, right? I mean, actually, it'd be fascinating. I've never thought about this until this moment. You have that bulleted list of all the random things you're interested in. You put that into ChatGPT and say, like, tell me what this means to you. That'd be interesting. You might learn something. I'm totally serious. You might learn something. It would say, blah, 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 and you'd be like, oh. The other thing it would be good for is you could say, I'm interested in some vague blah, 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 blah. Just put it in your own words. And what are areas of scholarship that are about this? It will produce things. Some of them might be made up, but some of them won't be, and you'll be able to tell quick enough. So that is a good way in terms of when you're in the exploratory vein, and this relates to your question too about the lots of different interests. When you're in that early on, you're exploratory, you're figuring out what you're interested in. I think Alice is exactly right. I love the way you put that. If the fact that you are interested in them all suggests there's something unifying them. As you begin to explore the different areas, that's where that's what you're really trying to do. It's an exploratory phase. You're trying to learn as much as you can. Eventually, when you're on the market, just what Alice said is exactly right, which is you gotta have a little bit more of a story. You got to put yourself into a box a little bit and say, I do this and maybe that too, but I'm this. But really try to figure out ways of sort of an adventure in self-knowledge, right? You're trying to figure out what it is that you are interested in, and if you're interested enough in it, then it'll write itself. Maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but it'll be easier. Other questions? Yeah.
If you do go into a career before you make your shift to academia, do you think it matters if what you end up spending your career on isn't necessarily aligned with what your scholarly interests are?
That's a good question. Let me say something about that just because I just was fielding this question. I mean, I think it is harder. I was just talking to someone just this week who wants to get into academia because they want to leave their practice, right? If you're able to build something on your practice, I mean, I'll let you talk after because it's an extreme version of this, right? You really do what you practice. I mean, that is great because then your practice is a full value add. It is like, oh wow, this person knows a lot about this subject and brings something that other people don't have. There are people like me who haven't practiced at all, really. So if you make a switch, it's harder. Right, and it means if that's the case, then the thing that Alice and I were both just saying about the keeping the list of things you're interested in from law school and other areas is that much more important because you don't really have your base of practical stuff to go on. That's what I would say, but I'm curious for both of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, it was the case for me that, my initial ideas for writing were really informed by what I was practicing. I would say if you find yourself kind of in a practice area that's not the thing you think you're interested in, there are other things you can do to kind of steep yourself in the ideas and the literature for the thing you want to write about. So, if you're at a firm, you're in practice area A, and you know that you're actually really interested in issue B, use your pro bono cases, go to the conferences in your city, meet with the lawyers who are engaged in that work. Just kind of show up in the spaces where those ideas are actually being shared, even if it has nothing to do with your work. This is a harder path to do because you're working a full-time job in area A and you're kind of using your spare time to really immerse yourself in B. It is one reason why I think a lot of people will use the fellowship programs as a transition point because you have no other distractions and you can really focus on exploring the thing that you were already interested in. But it's not impossible to kind of develop your knowledge base in a different area from the one that you're actually working in. It's just a harder path.
Yeah, and I think also it depends on, I think if, for many people, they're transitioning to law teaching after maybe 2 years or 3 years. It doesn't matter as much what you did. So my practice doesn't relate very much at all. I did a little bit of church and state stuff, which I'd still write about. But my practice experience doesn't relate necessarily to my scholarship as directly. If you're coming out a little further, a little later in your career, then the law schools are going to wonder, well, what's happening here? Are you just trying to get out of the law firm, or whatever the practice thing you're in, or are you're bringing a lot of knowledge that you have, and after 5 to 8 years, you've got a lot more knowledge. So that would be more likely that you'd want that to be related. But my work was not particularly related to my practice.
And one thing that I think is important to clarify, because again, I found myself saying this just this week, is that not only is it hard but important, it's arguably necessary to do what Alice was saying if you're making that switch. Because even the fellowships and the VAPs are a kind of segue to legal academia, to a tenure track position. But they require, people with full PhDs are applying to those programs. So to get one of those fellowships, you have to have, I think at this point, you have to have a little bit of scholarship, don't you? I don't think you have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Unless you've been a hot shot, right? What do you think? I'm curious.
Those are the fellowships can be competitive.
Yeah.
But I still think they're taking GDs who are pretty good candidates.
But have
for,
not
like, lots
published
of other
absolutely
things.
nothing.
Yeah, to some degree.
Maybe.
But
I think it's-
But this is a competitive environment, and so there are people who are out there
Yeah.
like PhDs with lots of writing, but we are seeing lots of, again, JD onlys who have
Yeah.
one or a few pieces maybe, but one major piece getting jobs. And
Yeah.
again, it does depend on the law school. So
Yep.
there are lots
Yep.
of different law
Totally.
schools and different kinds of law schools out there. And again, the curriculum's often the same, and the job is great in all of them, but they might demand a different balance, for example, between scholarship and teaching.
Yep.
So there are law schools that I interviewed with who were very, very focused on the teaching component and a lot less on the scholarly component. And they're trying to pick up people who have some expertise, maybe in their practice area.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
One of the reasons why I'm excited about academia is I'm really looking forward to like the student mentorship aspect. How much opportunity do you feel like there is in the jobs for that, as opposed to like an undergrad campus or something?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things that I was thinking about too, because especially when you do public interest, there's a really strong kind of pay it forward mentality. So I was already spending a lot of my time offering advice to law students and to recent law grads about how to pursue public service. So it was a combination of realizing I already do a lot of mentorship of people interested in public service. I'm already enjoying teaching when I guest lecture. I like the writing piece. So all of that kind of together made the math work out for me to transition into academia. It is a part of the job. The kind of big main categories of the job, it's the teaching, it's the writing, and then service. Sometimes it's a formal committee assignment, like appointments or like this. But there's always kind of informal service where you're offering advice to students, some of whom are in your classes, some of whom aren't. And I think you can make that as much a proportion of your job as you have the time and interest for, but there is an expectation that everyone engage in that kind of mentorship in general.
That's good.
One thing I'd add, just again for those, is let's say you're a 1L and you're like academia, that could be cool. What people sometimes say, well, what should I do? Get engaged in your classes. Like, there's nothing to be done as a 1L at this point, right? That's like, engage, be curious, talk to your classmates, and read some legal scholarship. You don't have to read a ton of it, but read some of it. Right, just to see what, like an article, pick your favorite professor, read an article they wrote recently and be like, oh, this looks like legal scholarship. There's lots of varieties of legal scholarship. Legal scholarship spans from narrative to empirical work, very economics heavy, some with numbers, some without, right? So there's a huge array of scholarship out there, and you want to kind of look at it and draw upon your undergraduate experiences too in this regard, right? You've read some stuff maybe as an undergrad in some field that you studied. So do read legal scholarship. That's helpful to know what we do, right, in our spare time, and then talk to your teachers about what they do. Be a research assistant. That's a really good way. Because then you'll do a lot of footnotes. Fabulous. It's really, right? But it shows you what we're trying to do too. And think about when you're reading your case books, you're reading these cases. Those cases are we're not training you to be legal academics in this, right? We're training you to be practicing lawyers. But in the notes behind the cases are often lots of little references to law review articles. And we don't read them, right? You just look at the notes and you ignore them. But maybe go and be like, hey, looks like a cool law review article. Let's see what that looks like. Now that's 50 or 60 more pages. I'm not encouraging you to read that on top of all the burdens you already have and all the reading you have. But if you're curious and it sparks your interest, that tells you something, right? It tells you something.
Just two suggestions. One is there's a blog called Jotwell, Journal of Things We Like Lots.
Well, that's what that stands for?
Yeah.
I never knew that.
It's professors who kind of write short reviews about recent legal scholarship, and they're organized by categories. So if you just kind of want to know what are law professors writing around in health law or in IP, the blog is a good way to get access to that, and I think you can sign up for a newsletter. The other is Martha Minow, who was my dean when I was in law school. She wrote a piece for the Journal of Legal Education a while ago called like a field guide to legal scholarship, something kind of along those lines. That's super short. It's like an 8-page essay, and it's basically a description of the types of legal scholarship that exist out there. Is it an empirical project? Are you trying to solve a policy problem? Are you bridging two doctrinal areas that people didn't understand were connected? So as you're thinking about your own notes or writing once you leave law school, you might kind of start there and just try and figure out what's the kind of project I'm trying to do, and that's a useful way to kind of get frameworks about what the aim is for different scholarly projects.
And let me add one thing, which isn't necessarily while you're in law school. You guys are busy. It's not necessarily that you don't need to do this, but just in general, it could be in law school or later as you're reading scholarship. One thing to do, which is some people seems obvious and some people seems horrifying, which is if there's an article that you read and you find it interesting, email the author and just tell them, I read your article and I found it really interesting. That's it. Right? They will be psyched. Most people don't read. I mean, very few people read law review articles in the large scheme of things. And even when you might think that they're like a big shot because they got talked a lot about in your class, you might think, ooh, they're like a big shot. They're not. They're just a law professor, and I bet they would be excited about that. So, and then, you never know, then 6 months later, you've got an idea for a project related to something they're doing, and you could send them a paragraph and say, this is what I'm interested in, do you think there's anything there? And they might respond, right? That's how you can build relationships over time, right? So I encourage you, that's another form of just sort of staying engaged in the scholarly field, essentially. Other questions? We're almost out of time, but could probably take one more, if there's one. Okay, well, if not, that's fine. I put my email address up here to encourage you to reach out if you guys want to talk more about this, or keep it for the future. If you're, when you're out, as I said, if it's not me, it'll be someone else who's doing this committee. It'll probably be you again, or you, more likely.
Yeah.
But anyway, someone will be doing it. So just remember that we are here, a source of support for you, and hope and good luck with your careers wherever they take you. Thanks for coming. Thank you, guys.